Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about something that has been affecting cities worldwide ever since cities were a thing. Something that you might think is completely normal coming from a Torontonian perspective. I'm talking about urban sprawl, otherwise known as uncontrolled development or urban spread. There are several terms I need to state the definitions of. The first is urban sprawl. It is defined as the uncontrolled expansion of an urban area or a town. Encyclopedia Britannica also notes that it is related to increased dependence on the automobile, less dense housing, and single-use zoning. Sprawl is often recognizable by cul-de-sacs, strip malls, poor pedestrian access, suburban subdivisions, and houses with big front lawns and backyards. Urban sprawl is a world issue because this problem affects cities all over the world no matter what political ideology, wealth, or location. Cities are massive, and if you needed to travel across the city, it takes an incredibly long time because of traffic or simply the size of the city. The second term is density. The higher density in development, the more people fit in a certain area. Examples of these include skyscrapers, condominium buildings, tall shopping malls and offices, and apartment blocks. Medium density buildings are much shorter than high-rises. Types of buildings that are related to these are townhouses, multi-unit housing, and semi-detached homes. They are generally less than 8 floors tall. Low-density buildings are less than 3 floors tall. They only have room for a few people. These include bungalows, shotgun houses, cottages, small convenience stores, and detached homes. The third term is mixed-use development. This is a type of development that incorporates multiple types of zoning. It is a combination of 2 or more commercial, residential, office, institutional, entertainment, and cultural functions. A prime example would be Hong Kong, where there simply isn't a lot of available space left to build housing, so usually condominiums are built with shops on their first or second floors. If one of the residents needed to buy some food, they could simply walk downstairs. Before we examine how to solve urban sprawl, we first have to understand what type of world issue this is. This fits into multiple categories. First, this is obviously an environmental issue. Low-density, single-family homes take up a lot of room. You have a front yard, a garage, 1 or 2 floors, and a decently long backyard. Now, multiply that across all of the area around you. Doesn't that take up a lot of space? Urban sprawl takes up a lot of land, often land that used to be for agriculture. Not only that, but the way that they were designed makes it bad for walking and public transportation, forcing people to use a car. This results in higher pollution and congestion along roads and freeways. Don't get me wrong, I love freeways. But now when our roads are completely jammed to the point where transit could be a better alternative, and they get to mock car users. Individual homes also require more energy, as in electricity and energy required to get around, because homes are so spread out. Urban sprawl is also an economic problem. Although large houses, mansions, and rural homes are expensive and are great investments to the individual, it is quite detrimental to the municipality they belong in. Suburbs also steal development away from the downtown core, which loses businesses and residents to the suburbs. Services like power and sewage get stretched out, oftentimes taking funding away from the inner city and places like ghettos. Sprawl also uses up valuable land that could have been used for commercial or industrial land, causing an economic loss. In a report by Michael Batty, Elena Basusi, and Nancy Chin, they said, economic costs and benefits are equally difficult to disentangle. Many of these are indirect or derivative. Transport costs and the loss of travel time must be weighed against congestion incurred if higher densities were to replace the decentralized, low-density development. The accessibility provided by the car with the ability to make multiple trips and combine diverse activities generate less obvious benefits such as the psychological convenience of such access. Basically, they are comparing the impacts and looking at the dilemma of continuing with low-density development versus replacing them with high-density development. With spread-out low-density sprawl, there will be longer travel times and higher transportation costs, but with higher density buildings instead, there will be more congestion and subsequently more noise and air pollution. Uncontrolled development is also related to politics. Municipal governments are in charge of zoning, which dictates what a parcel of land can be used for. There are industrial, commercial, office, mixed-use, institutional, recreational, open space, and residential zoning. There's definitely a lot more. Each type has its own subcategories such as light and heavy industry, high-rise, mid-rise, quadplex, triplex, duplex, and single-family homes. Governments are choosing to zone low-density instead of higher-density buildings such as homes that can house more than one family in the same building. The final issue, it's kind of a mix between social and cultural impacts. Suburban houses are often expensive, and only the high class and middle class can afford them. The report by Michael Batty, Elena Fasusi, and Nancy Chin briefly explained that the upper class and often white people can afford to live in the suburbs and commute by car, while non-white, working class people live closer to the city centers.
Everybody agreed that segregation was the worst thing this country ever did.
The report also detailed a lot of things. Cities are starting to decentralize from what seems like centrifugal force, as new activities are being created at the city's outer edges but are still connected to the city through better transportation. Compare a major city to a smaller town like Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Picton, Ontario. In Picton, all of the stores are on the main highway through the town. Contrast to small towns, Grand Rapids has multiple central areas, which is called polynucleated development. These are the different types of development: compact contiguous, linear strip corridor, polynucleated, and scattered contiguous. Compact contiguous cities have very closely packed and tall mixed-use buildings. Transit options are offered and are usually mass transit like heavy rail, light rail, or high-capacity buses. Linear strip corridor development happens when there is development surrounding transit lines. They can take the form of high-density or low-density buildings. Polynucleated nodal cities have multiple centers where development occurs. This is visible in Toronto, where there are multiple city centers in each of the amalgamated cities like Etobicoke, Scarborough, North York, Old Toronto, and York. Scattered contiguous cities have random development. It's incredibly rare, and I think it only exists in rural areas. Let's have a look at the upsides and downsides of urban sprawl that the report has shown. The first item on this list is regarding housing. Although it isn't efficient, sprawl does provide housing for people, which is highly in demand. Nonetheless, the land used to build these homes was once fertile land, meaning that that piece of land used to build a house is now no longer fertile. Sprawled land contributes to lowering housing costs because it increases supply and reduces scarcity. On the other hand, there is a lack of services nearby, so only car owners can make the commute to get to the closest ones. One thing to note is that suburban homes have more private spaces like a front lawn and a backyard. Apartments and condos do not have much private space, only giving you your unit, a balcony, and the rest is common space, where everyone in the building shares the area. However, I see this as a more selfish perspective. Mixed-use buildings and high-rise apartments can house more people per area, making less land needed to house more people. This style of living is more considerate to others, as people are giving up their freedoms of having a lot of private space and their freedom to have a yard in order to fit more people in their city who need a place to live. Residential areas, no matter the density, are usually something that attracts transit companies to serve because these people need to get around somehow. Sprawled lands do get served by transit eventually. This can be seen with Line 5 in Toronto, with the majority of the lands located near a station being low or medium density. If there is no transit nearby, however, all the residents will resort to driving, which will put pressure on road and highway networks. Single-family housing is seen as an investment that will appreciate in value. However, the downside is that services are located further away. Suburbs, especially ones with expensive houses, segregate neighborhoods. As I've mentioned before, only richer people can afford to live there, and therefore it separates people by income level. However, Randall O'Toole, who is pro-sprawl, says that apartments were created by the communists because they said it would be easier to bomb if the residents revolted. Excuse me, the Cold War ended 31 years ago. Cars are the mover of choice for many suburbanites as a result of poor transit access. There is the gain of psychological convenience, which means that people will do something that they probably wouldn't have done if they didn't have a way to do it easily. An example of this is not wanting to walk 30 minutes to get groceries often, just because it would take you 30 minutes to do so. But if you had a car, you would go buy groceries more often because you know it will take you much less time to do it. Cars also allow the convenience of travel because it's pretty obvious. Train lines and subway lines cannot go everywhere. Cars can go anywhere there's a paved road and a place to park. They allow for intercity travel, especially to areas where there's not enough demand for transit. Let's say someone wanted to go to Tobermory, Ontario from Toronto, Ontario. You could just hop in your car, get on Highway 10, and you will be there in around 3 to 4 hours. Or you could take a subway and catch a bus that runs on demand. Also, urban sprawl is kinda ugly. Whoops. There are many cars but More on Randall O'Toole. He calls himself the anti-planner and he has worked at the Cato Institute, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C. He believes that housing is an investment that appreciates in value, and that the government should not force people to live in higher density apartments that generally are worth less than houses. People who live in apartments generally don't own their own homes, and O'Toole thinks that cities are dense enough. There's also the issue of freedom, as O'Toole believes that the government forcing developers to build higher density housing is removing their right to choose which type of housing they want to build. He also says that people generally chose to live in single-family homes, not condos. You know who else hates condos? Not in my backyards, or NIMBYs for short, do not like their surroundings being changed in fear of things such as noise pollution, traffic, or more people moving into their neighborhood. They are the type of people who will complain about development near them and request the government to have it be built elsewhere. Sometimes they will dislike and oppose the construction of new tall and dense buildings, as well as overground and ag-grade streetcar lines. They present themselves as the defenders of historical housing, property values, and they think they are stopping the local government's control over the people. How can urban sprawl be solved? The first way to reduce sprawl is to create a greenbelt. A greenbelt is an area around the limits of a city that is reserved for agriculture and for green space. It can also refer to undeveloped land and natural land. Greenbelts stop development from ruining arable land and from cities sprawling further. A well-known example of a greenbelt from a Canadian perspective is the Golden Horseshoes Greenbelt, which surrounds Toronto, Mississauga, Burlington, Hamilton, Brampton, Vaughan, Richmond Hill, Markham, Newmarket, Pickering, Ajax, Oshawa, and Bowmanville, along with the Niagara Escarpment and the Oak Ridges Moraine. The land is reserved for agriculture, parks, wetlands, forests, watersheds, and green space. Urban growth boundaries are similar to greenbelts. They do not permit cities from expanding beyond the limits, and the rural land stays for agricultural use. The UGB is decided so that the city still has room for another 20 years of growth. This way, the city will focus more on increasing housing availability by converting low-density housing into high-density housing instead, slowing growth while increasing the efficiency of the land being used. One of the reports that I read by Seung-Hoon Cho, Joel Chen, Stephen T. Yen, and David B. Eastwood looked at the effects of an urban growth boundary on Knox County, Tennessee. It mostly revolved around the two cities, Knoxville and Farragut. The studies showed that the UGB encouraged densification and minimized use of undeveloped land within the boundaries. It preserved farmland and open space, while also encouraging urban revitalization and infilling, which is a technique that involves removing older homes and replacing them with more dense, closely packed houses. Knoxville saw an increase in development, while parcels of land in the neighboring school district areas and Farragut saw decreases in the likeliness of being developed. The land within the Knoxville boundaries saw an increase in development because of the proximity to city services and amenities. However, in the neighboring city of Farragut, development was less likely because people chose to move into Knoxville over Farragut. Nonetheless, both cities have been able to encourage urban revitalization over urban sprawl, despite only having implemented an urban growth boundary for a short period of time. The downside of a UGB is that it sometimes just exports sprawl to another city. The researchers I just mentioned above made another study the following year in 2007, and they found out that Knoxville had just been exporting its sprawl west, almost completely contradicting their findings last year. Another way of stopping urban sprawl is simply by not developing new housing at the edge of the city. Just don't do it. This can be done by infilling, for example, as mentioned earlier. An article made by a professor and a graduate student from Concordia University mentioned brownfield recycling, which was the process of reusing land that was once empty, abandoned, or repurposed from a former industrial area. This can range from plazas that don't get much traffic anymore, old factories, abandoned homes, and destroyed buildings. An example of this is Toronto's Portlands and East Harbour, which originally were industrial areas. East Harbour was a soap factory owned by Unilever Canada that has been sitting abandoned since 2008 after a strike caused the factory to go bankrupt. Apparently, Cadillac Fairview purchased the site and they will transform it into a mixed-use and transit-oriented community which will complement the Ontario line that the government is building. Most, if not all, North American cities are car-centric, meaning that they are planned towards cars and infrastructure is there to benefit cars. There's a paradox called the road paradox that says if a road is expanded to increase capacity, induced demand from people noticing that it is convenient to drive will fill up the road again, which prompts planners to decide to widen the road again.
This will fix traffic, I swear, bro. Just one more lane, please. Just build it, bro.
Urban planners are starting to move towards transit-oriented planning, which focuses on building dense housing that accompanies nearby transit systems. Transit-oriented planning allows people to access public transit more easily by building ways for people to get to the transit quicker, like park and ride lots for commuters that are a little farther away from the stop, or walking bridges from points of interest. The area around a station is often owned by the transit company, so they could develop it into housing and shopping centers, generating more income for the company to maintain the line. Personally, I believe that brownfield recycling is definitely one of the most effective ways to reduce urban sprawl. Since so many factories are being outsourced to other countries or are being moved away from urban areas, the land that was previously industrial usually remains vacant as there are no other industries to take its place. If cities rezone the land from industrial to residential after confirming that the land is suitable for development, meaning that the land is free of pollution, they won't need to build houses at the edges of cities. I reached out to a few city planning YouTubers, but literally nobody got back to me. Instead, I met a recent graduate from TMU's Regional and Urban Planning program, Benjamin Trong. While finalizing the script for this video, my classmates and I found out that he actually ran as an MPP for the NDP, and he's also an alumni of our school. My first question was, urban sprawl is the uncontrolled growth of towns and cities. Who is to blame for the rapid expansion? The municipal government or developers exploiting the lack of an urban growth boundary? He answered, sprawl primarily happened because of the push for autocentric design in the past, since everyone at the time was moving away from the downtown core to get their own homes. After the Greenbelt was established, it prevented new housing from being built in those areas, leaving single-family housing in the suburban neighborhoods with no room to increase density without demolishing homes, and it was really hard to convince homeowners to move out. My second question was, is urban sprawl detrimental to the city's transportation? What if the new areas are transit-oriented? Does transportation come first or development first? Urban sprawl is not detrimental to a city's transportation, rather it just makes it harder to plan transit as there are usually not enough people to warrant high-capacity transportation such as a train or even a streetcar. Trong says it's harder to plan transit around developed areas than it is to plan development around transit. The more spread out a population is, the harder it is to plan transit that will meet the demand and capacity for it. In single-family housing, homeowners have more land to use for things like planting gardens and garages. With more dense housing, especially condominiums and most mixed-use developments, homeowners have no green space besides a balcony and a rooftop garden. Do people have to give up the luxury of having a yard and a garage in order to combat low-density sprawl? Trong notes that single-family homes are no longer considered sustainable with the level of growth that modern-day cities have. He says, if we're gonna live sustainably in the future and be able to support our populations, I believe the best option is to intensify development whenever we can. Meaning that unfortunately, things like lawns, gardens, and private garages are a luxury that must be given up. To conclude, urban sprawl is the uncontrolled growth of the city. It has been affecting basically every city in the world, especially those in countries that are autocentric. Sprawl ruins the environment by removing animal habitats, fertile land, and all of the cars that the suburbanites drive contribute to increased pollution. Uncontrolled development is mostly the fault of governments and developers for allowing the growth to get out of control and not setting limits. Because everything is so spread out, cities suffer as they need to spend more money on service buildings to cover all the area that the suburbs take up. Despite houses with private space being valuable investments, this is selfish thinking, as more people who are looking for affordable housing could comfortably live in a much denser area. It's also another case of the rich get richer, as well as reinforcing segregation. Polynucleated development takes away businesses and funding from the downtown core. Linear strip corridor development, compact contiguous, and transit-oriented development are built near public transit systems that seek to boost ridership. Defenders of low-density housing have more selfish reasons to keep their private lands and freedoms, while defenders of medium and high-density housing have more selfless reasons to promote a sense of community and relying on the car less. Although cars give people the convenience of traveling almost anywhere, planners are starting to move away from cars and focusing more on transit, which is much more efficient in moving people and helps reduce your carbon footprint. Besides, how often do people need to drive to a place that they couldn't take transit to? Greenbelts and urban growth boundaries set limits on how far one city can expand, preserving open space and agricultural land. Meanwhile, brownfield recycling is a better option in my opinion, as reusing vacant land reduces the need to build houses at the edge of the city. Why would lower and middle class citizens rather live in the suburbs or on the outskirts of town, where it's proven that there's little to no sense of community compared to a more dense neighborhood further into the city? Thank you everyone for watching, and especially thank you to all the people who have contributed footage to the video, and have a great day.